In controlled cognitive recall studies from the 1970s, researchers documented consistent eye movement patterns occurring before verbal responses. These movements aligned with specific types of memory retrieval rather than social communication signals. The implication was clear. Eye motion was being treated as part of the retrieval process, not as expressive behavior. The question was no longer whether eye movement means something. It became something more precise. What system is the eye actually serving when a person is not yet speaking, but already remembering? This field sits within cognitive neuroscience and is often referred to as ocular motor memory indexing. The concept is not that eyes reveal truth in a symbolic sense, but that they participate in the retrieval architecture of memory itself. The core idea is simple in structure. Memory retrieval is not purely internal. It is distributed across motor and perceptual systems that were originally involved in encoding the experience. This is consistent with broader cognitive models influenced by Daniel Kahneman's dual process theory and working memory frameworks in Baddeley's model of cognition. In parallel research on deception and cognitive load, similar patterns appear. When mental effort increases, motor systems become partially recruited in support of retrieval. Eye movement is one of the most visible outputs of this recruitment. By the end of this analysis, what changes is not your interpretation of eye direction. It is your understanding of what thinking looks like when cognition is forced to reconstruct rather than simply recall. In structured memory experiments, subjects are asked to recall visual scenes, conversations, or abstract information while being monitored. A consistent pattern emerges. Eye movement tends to align with the original sensory encoding domain. Visual memories activate upward or lateral gaze shifts. Constructed or hypothetical narratives often produce downward or inward gaze stabilization. This is not symbolic behavior, it is residual activation of the perceptual system. The brain does not store memories as files, it reconstructs them using the same neural architecture that originally perceived them. Detection tool. Observe whether eye movement occurs before verbal structuring or after speech initiation. If it precedes speech, it is likely retrieval-related rather than communicative. This introduces a deeper question. If eye movement reflects memory access, what happens when memory itself is uncertain or reconstructed under pressure? When individuals are asked to recall events under uncertainty, the brain does not retrieve a fixed record. It reconstructs based on fragments, inference, and emotional weighting. During this reconstruction phase, eye movement becomes less stable. Instead of directional consistency, microshifts occur, brief recalibrations of visual attention without external stimuli. This reflects internal search processes across distributed memory networks in the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex. What appears as looking for the answer is often the brain assembling a coherent narrative from incomplete data. Detection tool instability in gaze direction during questioning often signals reconstruction rather than retrieval. The more uncertain the memory, the more fragmented the ocular pattern. This leads directly into a more subtle layer. What happens when memory is not just incomplete but socially constrained? Memory is not accessed in isolation. It is filtered through social risk evaluation systems. When individuals anticipate judgment, the prefrontal cortex modulates recall to maintain social coherence. This introduces delay between memory access and verbal expression. Eye movement often reflects this delay. It stabilizes briefly during internal editing phases where socially unacceptable or conflicting details are suppressed. The eye does not just retrieve memory, it waits for permission from the social evaluation system. Detection tool, watch for eye stillness followed by delayed verbalization. This pattern often indicates internal filtering rather than pure recall. As these layers accumulate, a complication emerges that challenges the entire interpretation framework. But here is where it becomes more complex. The same eye movement patterns associated with memory retrieval also appear in individuals who are not recalling anything at all, but constructing plausible narratives in real time. In controlled studies of imagination and fabrication tasks, ocular motor patterns overlap almost completely with genuine recall conditions. This creates a fundamental ambiguity. eye movement does not distinguish truth from fabrication. It distinguishes cognitive load states that are structurally similar across both processes. The brain does not label experiences as real or imagined at the level of motor preparation. It only evaluates coherence and effort. This is where many popular interpretations of eye direction detection collapse under empirical scrutiny. The signal is real, the interpretation is often overstated, which leads to a more precise understanding of what eye movement actually represents. Modern cognitive models increasingly treat memory as a form of simulation. Recalling an event involves reactivating sensory motor patterns that approximate the original experience. Eye movement in this framework is not a signal about truth. It is a byproduct of simulation reconstruction. During this process, the oculomotor system is engaged as part of spatial mapping. Even when no external visual input is present, you are not seeing the past when you remember it. You are rebuilding a version of perception using the same systems that once saw it. Detection tool, consistent gaze patterns during recall suggest stable reconstruction. Disrupted or inconsistent patterns suggest high cognitive load or low memory integrity. This brings us to the final structural layer. What happens when reconstruction becomes indistinguishable from imagination? In high-level cognitive studies, researchers have found that imagination and memory share overlapping neural substrates. The hippocampus does not strictly separate past from possible scenarios. This means eye movement patterns during recall and projection become functionally indistinguishable in many cases. The brain is not retrieving truth. It is constructing plausible internal models based on probability and relevance. The distinction between remembering and imagining is often a difference in confidence, not structure. Detection tool. When eye movement occurs alongside narrative certainty without hesitation, it may reflect constructed coherence rather than verified memory. This completes the structural framework, but it also introduces a broader implication about perception itself. If eye movement is tied to reconstruction rather than truth detection, then what is being observed is not honesty or deception. It is cognitive construction under varying levels of uncertainty. This means that every conversation involving memory is, to some degree, an act of reconstruction rather than retrieval. And reconstruction is influenced by expectation, social pressure, and internal narrative consistency. The unsettling implication is not that people lie more than they realize. It is that people rarely access memory without altering it in the process of speaking, which raises a precise question. If perception and reconstruction are inseparable in real time, what exactly are you evaluating when you think you are reading someone? Now that the mechanism is clear, interpretation becomes structural rather than intuitive. First, observe timing, not direction. Eye movement before speech is more diagnostically relevant than the direction itself. It indicates retrieval initiation. Second, distinguish stability from volatility. Stable gaze patterns suggest coherent reconstruction. Volatile microshifts suggest high cognitive load or narrative assembly. Third, separate memory access from social editing. If eye stillness precedes delayed speech, filtering is likely occurring before verbal output. The goal is not to decode eyes as symbols. The goal is to recognize them as part of a cognitive system that is actively constructing reality in real time. Once this is understood, eye movement stops being a behavioral trick and becomes what it actually is: a visible trace of invisible cognition. The next layer of this research moves deeper into how micro-timing between speech and gaze reveals not what people remember, but how they prioritize reality itself.